In a kingdom deep in the heart of Africa, there was a curse so ancient that even the oldest grandmother could not remember a time before it existed. Every girl born in the village of Kondo was born bald. Not one strand, not one thread, not even the finest whisper of hair had touched a woman's head in that village for 7 generations. But one rainy season, a child was born who broke that rule. She came into the world screaming, as all babies do, but the midwife who caught her did not scream back with joy. She screamed with something else entirely. Because this baby, this tiny, furious, brand new girl, had hair, thick, black, shining, curling down past her ears before she had even drawn her second breath. The midwife stumbled backward. An elder woman pressed both hands over her mouth. Someone knocked over the lantern in the corner, and for one terrifying moment, the hut was swallowed in darkness. Then a voice came through the darkness, soft, exhausted, but absolutely certain. "That is my daughter," the voice said, "and she is a blessing, not a curse." That voice belonged to Amina, and the child in the midwife's trembling arms was named Sola. This is the story of what the village of Kondo did to Sola, and what Sola did for the village of Kondo. Stay with me, because I promise you, by the time this story is finished, you will understand that the things the world punishes most harshly are very often the things it needs most desperately. Before we go any further into Sola's story, if you are here for the first time, take just 1 second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stories like this one come every day on this channel, and you do not want to miss a single one. Now, let us go back to Kondo. Let us go back to Sola. The village of Kondo sat beside a wide, slow river at the edge of a great forest. The forest was old, older than the village itself, older than the kingdom it belonged to, older perhaps than memory. Its trees grew so tall and so close together that on certain afternoons, standing at the edge of the village, you could look toward the forest and see only darkness, even at midday. The people of Kondo were farmers and fishermen. They were proud people, hard-working people. They built strong homes from red earth and river clay. They grew yam, cassava, and sorghum in the rich soil along the riverbank. They sang at festivals and buried their dead with ceremony and wept openly when grief visited them, as grief visits all people eventually. They were, in almost every way, an ordinary village, except for the baldness. It had begun 7 generations ago, according to the elders who kept the history. Before that time, the women of Kondo had hair like women everywhere, some short, some long, some thick, some fine, all of it growing naturally from their heads, the way grass grows from good earth. Then the curse came. The story of the curse was told differently depending on who was doing the telling. Some said a powerful river spirit had been offended by a woman of Kondo who had thrown her shorn hair into the sacred water. Some said a traveling medicine man had placed the curse on the village after being refused hospitality. Some said the first bald woman was simply born that way, and the baldness had spread from mother to daughter like a seed passed quietly from one generation to the next. What everyone agreed on was this: for 7 generations, not a single female child born in Kondo had ever grown hair. Mothers raised bald daughters. Grandmothers told bald granddaughters about a time when women's heads had been different, though even the grandmothers could not truly remember it themselves. They had only heard it from their grandmothers, who had heard it from theirs. The baldness had become so normal, so completely woven into the fabric of daily life in Kondo, that most people no longer thought of it as a curse at all. It was simply the way women were, the way women had always been, the way women would always be. Until Sola. Amina was 22 years old the rainy season Sola was born. She was a quiet woman, the kind of person who observed more than she spoke, who listened carefully and thought for a long time before she said anything. She had married young to a man named Kofi, who fished the river with his brothers every morning and came home smelling of water and effort. Kofi had died 2 years before Sola was born, a fishing accident. His boat had overturned in a sudden storm, and the river, which had fed his family faithfully for years, had taken him without warning or apology. Amina had grieved deeply and then pulled herself upright, the way women who have no one else to lean on must eventually do. She had continued farming, she had continued living, and then, the following rainy season, she had discovered she was carrying Kofi's child. She had spoken to him in memory in the quiet of the night. "I will take care of this one," she had told him. "Whatever comes, I will take care of this one." She had not imagined what "whatever comes" would actually mean. When Sola arrived in the world with that impossible hair, Amina held her tightly and refused to let the fear in the hut become her fear. She named her daughter Sola, meaning sunshine, because that was exactly what the child felt like against her chest in that first moment: warm, bright, unasked for, and entirely necessary. The village had other feelings. The elder women came to visit the following morning, as elder women always do when a new child arrives. But the gifts they usually brought, groundnut soup, palm oil, blessings whispered over a baby's head, did not come this time. They came instead with worried faces and careful words and the particular silence of people who had already decided something among themselves before they arrived. "This child is different," the eldest among them said, looking at Sola's hair with an expression Amina couldn't quite read. "Yes," Amina agreed, "she is." The elder looked at her for a long moment. "It may not be safe," she said finally, "for the child, for you, for the village." Amina looked at her daughter. The child was sleeping now, her tiny chest rising and falling, her thick black hair curling against Amina's arm. "She is mine," Amina said quietly, "and she stays." The elders left without their usual blessings. Sola grew like all children grow, fast and in every direction at once. She learned to walk, to run, to climb the mango trees at the edge of the compound with a confidence that made Amina's heart simultaneously swell with pride and contract with fear. And her hair grew with her. By the time she was 5, it fell past her shoulders. By 8, it reached her waist. By 12, it was so long and so thick that it moved behind her like a living thing when she walked, like something with its own intention, its own direction, its own slow and beautiful purpose. The village watched it grow, and the village was not at peace with what it saw. The children ridiculed it first, as children often are, because they say plainly what their parents say only in private. They called Sola names at the river. They pulled her hair from behind and ran laughing. They excluded her from games and from the easy companionship that is every child's birthright, simply because she looked different from them, simply because she carried something on her head that they did not carry and could not have. Sola learned early to keep her chin up. She learned to walk as though the names didn't land. She learned to find her comfort in the river itself, in the early mornings before the rest of the village was awake, when she could sit at the water's edge and trail her fingers in the current and exist without anyone watching her or deciding what she meant. Her mother was her anchor. Amina braided Sola's hair every morning before the day began, working slowly and carefully, her fingers moving through the thick, dark lengths with a tenderness that said everything the words around them refused to say. "You are not a curse," Amina told her daughter every morning while her hands moved through her hair. "You are not a mistake. You are not something to be ashamed of. You are my daughter, and you are exactly as you were meant to be." Sola believed her, or she tried to, but belief is harder to hold on to when you're 12 years old and the whole world around you seems to have agreed on a different story. Among the adults, the feeling towards Sola was more complicated. Some treated her with a cautious kindness. They could see plainly that she was a good child, gentle and helpful and respectful of elders, and these things counted for something even in a village that was afraid of her. Others avoided her quietly, the way people avoid things they don't understand. And then there was Mama Kosi. Mama Kosi was the head of the Women's Council in Kondo, a position she had held for 15 years through a combination of genuine intelligence and a complete unwillingness to let anyone else have it.
She had a daughter named Remy, who was 17, 5 years older than Sola, and bald like every other girl in Kondo. Remy was beautiful. Remy was clever. Remy was everything Mama Kosi had poured herself into for 17 years. But Remy could not walk through the village without someone's eyes sliding away from her to find Sola, and Mama Kosi noticed, and Mama Kosi did not forgive. The Oracle of Kondo lived at the place where the river bent sharply to the left, disappearing into the oldest part of the forest. She had lived there as long as anyone could remember. Children were afraid of her in the comfortable way that children are afraid of things that have never actually harmed them, from a safe distance, with a kind of pleasurable terror. The year Sola turned 13, the oracle arrived earlier than expected. She walked into the center of the village at midday, when the sun was the highest and sharpest, and she stood in the open space between the market stalls and the council tree, and waited until people gathered around her, which did not take long. When the crowd was assembled, she
Stood in the open space between the market stalls and the council tree and waited until people gathered around her, which did not take long. When the crowd was assembled, she looked slowly around the circle of faces. Then she spoke. "The curse on this village," she said, in the particular voice she had when she was carrying something larger than herself, "was placed by a woman who was wronged. It can only be lifted by a woman who carries what was taken." The crowd was still. "What was taken from the cursed woman was her dignity," the oracle continued, "her identity, the thing that marked her as herself in the world. It was taken by people who feared what they did not understand." She paused. "The one who can end it stands among you now. She has always stood among you. The sign of her calling is plain on her head for anyone willing to see it." Every eye in the gathered crowd moved, without being directed to move, toward Sola. Sola stood very still. The oracle looked at her directly, the way the oracle looked at no one else that day. "She carries the gift and the remedy," the oracle said. "When the time comes, she will know what to do, but she must be protected until that time arrives. She must be kept whole." The oracle said nothing further. She turned and walked back the way she had come, disappearing between the first trees of the forest without looking back. The crowd stood in silence for a long moment. Then everyone began talking at once. Mama Kosi did not sleep that night. She lay on her sleeping mat in the darkness and stared at the ceiling of her hut and thought about the oracle's words with the focused intensity of someone trying to find a crack in a wall. She turned the words over and over. "She carries the gift and the remedy. She must be kept whole." If Sola was truly the one, if Sola's hair was truly the key to ending the curse, then Sola was about to become the most celebrated person in the history of Kondo. Her name would be spoken with the oracle's name, with the names of the great ancestors. Everything Sola had endured would be reframed as preparation. Every cruel word the village had spoken about her would become a source of shame. And Mama Kosi, who had spent 15 years quietly discouraging people from showing Sola too much warmth, would have been on the wrong side of history. She could not allow this. She sat up in the darkness and called softly for Remy. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Mama Kosi told her what she was thinking, not all of it, just enough. Remy listened, and to her mother's quiet satisfaction, Remy did not refuse. The plan was straightforward. 3 days before the new moon, the time the oracle had indicated in her indirect way when the remedy would need to be applied, Mama Kosi would host a gathering to celebrate Sola, to honor her, to welcome her publicly and warmly into the center of the village's gratitude. And at that gathering, when Sola's guard was lowered, Remy would get close enough to her to do what needed to be done. Sola's hair would be cut. Not shaved, just cut, just enough to break the wholeness the oracle had described,
just enough to raise the question of whether the gift had been compromised, just enough to buy Mama Kosi time. What Mama Kosi had not considered, what she had chosen not to consider, was that Remy had been listening to the oracle's words too, and Remy, unlike her mother, had been thinking not about power, but about the women of her village, her aunts, her cousins, her own smooth head, the 100 years of silence and loss that lived in the fact of their baldness. Remy had been thinking about what she actually wanted. The morning of the gathering, Remy rose before her mother was awake. She walked to the river. She sat at the edge of the water for a long time, watching the current move. Sola often sat at this same spot, she knew. She had seen her here in the early mornings, always alone, always quiet. Remy thought about her mother's plan. She thought about what her hands would have to do if she carried it out. She thought about Sola's face. She had watched that face for years, sometimes with jealousy, sometimes with something closer to admiration, though she had never allowed herself to call it that. She thought about the way Sola had walked through 13 years of this village's cruelty without letting it make her cruel in return. She thought about the oracle's words one more time. She must be kept whole. Remy stood up from the river. She went directly to Amina's home. She knocked on the door before she could change her mind. Amina opened it and looked at her with careful eyes. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me, because I know you have no reason to." Amina looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. Remy told her everything, every detail of her mother's plan, every word that had been spoken in their hut in the dark. When she finished, Amina was quiet. Then she said, "Why are you telling me this?" Remy thought about the answer for a moment. Then she said, "Because I want to grow hair, and I think that means I have to stop being someone who cuts other people's." Amina went to the council elder she trusted most, old Mama Tunde, who had been the keeper of the village's true history for 40 years, and who had always, quietly, been one of the few adults in Kondo to treat Sola with simple and uncomplicated kindness. Mama Tunde listened to everything. Then she went to the full council, and Remy stood before them and repeated what she had told Amina. Mama Kosi was brought in. She stood in the center of the council circle, and for the first time in 15 years, she had no argument ready, no prepared words, no countermove waiting in reserve. She stood with her plan exposed in the open air of the council house, and it was very small and very ugly in the light. She said nothing. The council stripped her of her position. They gave it to Mama Tunde temporarily, until new elections could be called. They sent Mama Kosi to work at the community farm under supervision and in silence for 30 days. Remy was not punished. The council acknowledged publicly that she had made the harder choice, not the easier one. That evening, as the new moon rose pale and thin over Kondo, Sola walked to the center of the village. She had been told what to do by the oracle in a quiet moment 2 nights before. The oracle had come to her at the river in the pre-dawn hours and spoken to her alone in words Sola would never fully share with anyone, because some instructions are meant only for the person who has to carry them out. She stood in the open space at the center of the village. She unbound her hair. It fell loose around her, all of it, every length of it, thick and black and moving softly in the night air like something alive. She placed both hands on the earth, and she stayed there in silence, in the way the oracle had told her to, still and open and unafraid, for as long as it took. Nobody who was present that night could agree afterward on exactly how long it lasted. Some said minutes, some said hours, but everyone agreed on what happened when it ended. Sola stood up slowly from the earth. She looked around at the gathered village, and she watched, one face at a time, as the women of Kondo reached up and touched their heads. First, the oldest grandmother, then a middle-aged woman near the market stalls, then a young girl of 10 who began to cry before she even fully understood what she was feeling. Thin at first, barely there, the finest possible thread of new growth, but real, undeniably, impossibly, beautifully real. The sound that rose from the village of Kondo that night was not like ordinary sound. It was the sound of something that had been held tightly for a long time, being finally, fully released. Amina found her daughter in the crowd and held her without words for a long time. Remy stood nearby, her hand pressed flat against her own head, her eyes closed, feeling for the first time something she had no words for yet, something between relief and beginning. Mama Kosi stood at the edge of the gathering and watched everything she had tried to prevent come true anyway. And in that moment, with nowhere left to hide, she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not triumph, something quieter and harder, the beginning of understanding. Years later, the children of Kondo grew up hearing the story of Sola, how she had been born different and punished for it, and endured and healed the village anyway, not with anger, not with revenge, but simply by remaining exactly who she was until the world caught up to understanding why. Be like Sola, their mothers told their daughters, braiding their daughters' growing hair with the same tenderness Amina had always used. When the world does not understand you, stay whole, stay true, stay exactly as you were made, because what you carry that others cannot see, that is very often the thing the world needs.
Because what you carry that others cannot see, that is very often the thing the world needs most. If this story moved you today, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that being different is not a burden, it is a calling. Subscribe to this channel for a brand new story every single week. Stories of courage, truth, and the power of staying whole in a world that keeps asking you to make yourself smaller. Thank you for watching until the end. It means everything. See you in the next story.